So Trevor Rice in the comment section had asked about the Bryce situation and what was up with the contract. Well, theoretically, nothing is up with the contract because he signed a 13-year deal, and there's still, 9 remaining on that? But he has Scott Boras, and Scott Boras clearly did not agree with the contract that Bryce signed, and in that, he means the no trade, no opt-outs, all of that.
Yeah.
So Scott Boras last week went on the John Heyman podcast, and this is not a problem ultimately because, John Middleton has even said the same thing, that he's underpaid. Bryce has
he told
kind
Bryce
of
that himself.
Yeah, like he's outperformed his contract. I think, you got a team-friendly deal because Bryce wanted to commit here, and we'll read the quote for you in a second. But he also wanted to be competitive, and he wanted the team to spend and have the ability to win titles. So, with that takes a little bit more money. So it is what it is. But this is what Scott Boras had to say last week on the John Heyman podcast. I think Bryce's point was, I created the opt-out with Alex Rodriguez, so Bryce was fully aware of it. I may have advised him on this 6 different times. This is not the economic way to do this. Bryce's point of view was, look, I'm going to go there and I'm going to commit. I'm going to go there and win. I want to show the fans that I like them and I'm in one place, and we're going to win this way. Then when the time comes after I produce and prove what I do, if I have discussions or matters related to economics, I want the owner to say, which I give John Middleton a lot of credit that he did say, is that Bryce Harper is undervalued. And that's the whole goal. He gave him a record contract. After 3 or 4 years of performance, he delivered more than expected. And then the player, if he has the economic dynamics that he wants to discuss, he'll do so with his ownership, and that's how Bryce felt. So if that's how he felt when he signed the original deal, that discussion is going to very much be on the table between Bryce and John Middleton in the very near future. You're going to have to pay Bryce Harper more money.
Yeah, you are.
Which is fine. It's not my money.
Exactly. And I mean, listen, as you talk about, even last year after the homer by Bryce in Game 5 of the NLCS, Middleton admitted then that, Bryce had been handed to them, signed for a bargain. We all know that Bryce has overperformed in a quick time, has really exceeded a lot of expectations. And now, without an opt-out, puts Bryce and Boras, and I always think Bora Bora when I hear Boris, but I'm just gonna,
I'd
whatever.
like to go to Bora Bora.
I'd love to be a Bora Bora, but Bryce and Bora.
Find that sugar daddy, Renee, you'll get there.
That's all, guys, that's all. It puts them in a situation where they don't have an opt-out, which means there's no leverage, and now having 8 years, $196 million left in his contract, Bryce doesn't have that same ability to go back and say, he wants more added to his contract easily. So I know Boras has, and for Harper, there's been those conversations about needing to sit down with ownership, needing to have talk about what is that we want to achieve. What are our goals? It's every once in a while you need to align again. And I think it is tough because a 13-year deal, as we all know, it's much changes. So much changes at that time. And I love the fact that Bryce committed to it because he wanted to show Philly how much he's committed. He wanted to show that he's willing and okay with taking, a different type of a contract for the greater good of the team because he wants to win championships here. So bigger picture, yeah, he was saying and doing all the right things. But now that we're in the nitty-gritty of things and Bryce has been exceeding expectations, it is tough when you look at it.
And Ohtani's going to completely reset every market that's ever existed. So, Bryce is going to be looking at, and you don't want him to grow salty. So, Barbara says in the chat, that he's, that's just the agent talking for him. Well, here's the follow-up quote to that.
Yes, there's more.
Boras says, no, it's not crazy. Bryce has mentioned that he wants to sit down with ownership in time and talk about. He wants to achieve all of his goals in Philadelphia. He obviously wants to play into his early 40s. He has those goals. He really wants to do everything he can to put up Hall of Fame numbers. I think he's committed to the game, committed to his city. All those conversations will be coming forward at an appropriate time.
Yeah.
So when that appropriate time is, who knows? Maybe it's when they're having do you want to play first base or right field? What are you more comfortable with? Maybe they have the conversations then. Again, not our money, but be on the lookout for, either negotiations or more guaranteed
Yeah.
money finding its way to Bryce Harper in some way, shape, or form. How that would look, I don't know, because you don't really want to extend him that much longer.
Yeah.
Because he is into the early 40s at that point. But
He
maybe
wants to play until he's 45, Bryce has said.
that's wild. I mean,
That's
if
his
he's
goal. He said that he wants to play until he's 45, and that is very, very wild to hear. I know Mickey is saying extend it out another 10 years. As you're talking about, the years aren't really, Father Time isn't really on Bryce's side in terms of another 10-year extension. But Trevor's asking about or mentioning, it's not that bad. I thought it was a legit issue. Bryce is definitely underpaid. It can be, though. I mean, let's be honest. Money is a very awkward situation. I hate having money conversations with anybody. It's a very tough thing to talk about, especially within your workplace. So for Bryce Harper coming into the Phillies and for Scott Boras to have these conversations, you're trying to find that middle ground of, I'm rewinding back to when the 13-year deal was first being orchestrated. You're trying to figure out what makes the most sense for my client and also for the team, because you don't want to come across as the guy that's just here to collect all the checks and you don't care about what makes sense for the team. And you're trying to find that balance of getting paid what you deserve, but also making sure it's not going to be something that the team can't afford and they're now looking you at as a selfish player. And Bryce's decision was very selfless. But now when you fast forward and look at it, it puts you in a tough situation, because if for Dave Dombrowski, and for Middleton, they're focused on Aaron Nola, Reese, all free agency. If you dismiss Bryce Harper or you don't have that conversation, it almost comes as a disrespect. Like anybody that's in the chat or listening to the show later, I'm sure at some point you've had to go back into your job, for instance, and talk to HR and have maybe like a contract negotiation, a conversation, or salary conversation, or pay raise conversation. It's awkward, but it has to happen. And if your HR department was to come back and dismiss you when you've been working there for 3 years now, let's say, and you've been exceeding expectation and crushing it on your quarterly goals, and God forbid they come back and dismiss you, that leaves a very sour taste in your mouth. So it's not a big deal in the sense that Bryce is happy here. But depending on how these conversations go, when they happen, if they happen, how they happen, you want to make sure you're being professional, that you're respecting who Bryce Harper is and not making him feel dismissed and unheard, because he's bringing up valid points alone from how he's been performing with the Phillies. So
yeah, John Middleton knows all that, and I think he's emotionally intelligent and knows all that. A couple of people in the chat are saying give him a stake of ownership. I believe that is illegal, if I'm not mistaken. Or else I'm sure John Middleton would toss him 2 or 3 percentage points. Mickey Darkin says give him that Bobby Bonilla type of deal, and that might be something. I believe he does have some deferred money in the deal. But the reason Scott Boras is bringing this up, and Tyler has a list for us here, because every year baseball contracts grow, and while the deal may be fair-ish now, in 5 or 6 years, it's going to be like stealing. So Scott Boras is probably trying to get ahead of that to a degree. Tyler has a couple names of people that are making more money than Bryce Harper next year.
And this is the tough part,
hence
too.
why Scott Boras raised this to John Heyman.
I'm gonna preface this by saying there are some guys on this list that are ahead of him that are 100% deserving of the money that they're about to make, such as Mookie Betts, who's about to make $30 million, who's one of the best players in baseball. Corey Seager was
just won a World Series.
World Series,
well deserving,
huge piece of the World
MVP.
Series. $35 million. Garrett Cole might be the best starting pitcher in baseball right now, 36. But
pitchers are almost different than position players.
Some of the guys that are on this list include Carlos Rodon, who signed a massive contract with the Yankees and was hurt for a majority of last year. Chris Bryant, who signed a massive contract with the Colorado Rockies and hit 233 a season
former
ago.
AAU, whatever they call it in baseball, teammate.
One of the absolute scam jobs of the history of modern baseball. Giancarlo Stanton is at $32 million.
Wow.
And he just got hurt for next year during this conversation.
Steven Strasburg was set to make 35 before he retired. He would have been at $35 million. How about this one? This is the most disgusting one. Patrick Corbin, $35.4 million.
And the Phillies dodged that bullet.
And actually, I lied to you. That may not be the most disgusting one, because this is the absolute This is the scam job of the century. $38.5 million next year is allocated to Anthony Rendon.
See, that's the tough part, though. When Bryce signed that deal, it was a historic deal. But with every year, there's more and more money being brought in. Teams have more money to allocate. The amount of, contracts, the amount of annual pay that guys are getting is increasing. So that deal as you talk, the 21st on the list. He's the 21st highest paid guy on the list heading into 2024. That's wild.
And he's pretty much become the face of baseball.
He has,
here.
and that's what makes it tough.
He kind of was a little bit before, but I think
he really is
with
now.
his clutchness and playoff performances.
Yeah, so that's, I mean, I agree. I know Trevor's saying in the chat, like, and you mentioned it too, we all feel optimistic with the conversations that are going to be happening between Bryce Harper and Scott Boras and Middleton. But it is something that I'm glad it's being brought up because there's 20 guys above him. And I don't know across those 20 names how many really, if I'm Bryce Harper, I'm looking back and like, okay, that's fine.
And Ohtani's about to far exceed all of them. I mean, Ohtani, because of, well, he can't pitch next year, but between the offensive and pitching aspect, he's probably going to get north of $40 million a year.
Yeah. The numbers just keep going up.
That's why
that's sports, though. Like,
Scott Boras is no dummy.
My gosh.
And, he represents Alec Boehm and other players and Rhys Hoskins of the world. So he's going to, he's going to put the coals to John Middleton. It's why you get Scott Boras as an agent. Don't hate the player, Renee. Hate the game. And Scott Boras is very good at playing the game.